And was it unavoidable?
Well, I think some recession was unavoidable, yes. The good news for Australia is we entered it in better shape than any other country. And the bad news is that our government, through the decisions it's taken, have made it worse than it might otherwise have been.
Let's look at the decisions that Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan have made in the budget. They're taking the knife to the areas of so-called middle-class welfare that you set up, the private health insurance rebate, the superannuation rules that favour the rich. Isn't that fair enough? This was unsustainable spending, wasn't it?
Well, I don't accept it was. And I'm interested you say so-called middle-class welfare. The private health insurance rebate is not welfare, middle class or any other class. It's good public policy to have a strong private health system as well as a public health system, because if you have a lot of people in private health insurance, there'll be less strain on public hospitals and the government won't have to spend as much money on them. And what the private health insurance rebate was and was a tax incentive to encourage people to join private health insurance in furtherance of good public policy. That's not welfare. It's a sensible use of the taxation system to promote a public policy objective. Another area that's attacked as middle-class welfare are family benefits. Well, family tax benefits are a tax compensation for the cost of having children. A couple on $80,000 a year between them with a couple of children have, by virtue of having a couple of children, far greater expenses than a couple on $80,000 with no children. And are we saying as a society that we so devalue children that we're not going to have a tax system that provides some kind of compensation for those costs?
But what about a couple on $500,000? Why
well,
do they deserve taxpayers'
support? Well, a couple on $500,000, incidentally, under our system, wouldn't be getting the family tax benefit anyway.
But why do they deserve a private health insurance rebate?
Well, you could say that equally. Why does a prosperous company deserve to have a research and development grant? I'll tell you why they deserve to have a research and development grant, because it's good public policy to encourage investment by corporations in research and development. So you've got to look at what the objective. If the objective of something like this is to further a good public policy aim, then it ceases, by any stretch of the definition, to be welfare. I mean, I'll give you an example of what would be middle-class welfare. It would be to pay everybody, irrespective of their private means, the pension. Now, that would be middle-class welfare, because you wouldn't be furthering a public policy objective. But if you give people an incentive to go into private health insurance, and something like 50% of the serious operations in Australia are now performed in private hospitals. Now, I mean, it's got nothing to do with welfare. It's got everything to do with promoting good public policy.
There is now the prospect of a clash over this in Parliament. Malcolm Turnbull has said that he'll vote against that means test on private health insurance. I think you said earlier that this talk of an early election is nonsense or rubbish. You said,
yeah, I did.
As Prime Minister, when you were Prime Minister, you kept open the threat of a double dissolution on many occasions. Is that a smart political...
I don't think at any stage I went with so little reason.
No,
but sort of language. No, I think
you would not rule it out. You would keep it on the table.
I'm not saying that Mr. Rudd should rule it out, but I watched his interview the other night, and he was deliberately sort of cranking it all up. Well, I mean that's his game. He can play that. That's fine. But all I'm saying is that the Australian people don't like early elections without good reason, and I didn't have them. And we may have in '98, we may have gone a few months earlier, but nothing like, I mean, to be talking about one now, Bob Hawke had one in 1984 after, 20 months, and he got quite a shock. He lost seats. And one of the reasons he lost seats was that people were awake. They said, well, why on earth are you doing this?
As you know, there's been debate about the Treasury forecasts in the budget being too optimistic. As someone who was Treasurer, who was Prime Minister for so many years, how believable are Treasury forecasts? Well,
I put it this way, that they seem to me to be at the upper end of probability. And the logical weakness that the government's got is that they're likening this recession to the 1930s, yet they are using the recovery experiences of the 80s and 90s from earlier recessions to justify the figures. Now, they can't really have it both ways. I mean, in the 1930s, you didn't have the rapid recovery. In fact, I've just finished reading a new history of the Depression, which sort of reminds you that in America, it lingered on almost until the outbreak of World War II. Many people argue that it was really World War II that finally buried the recession, the Depression in the United States. So Mr Rudd can't say this is the worst since the 1930s, but incidentally, my growth forecasts are based on what happened in the 80s and 90s. Now, having said that, you never know with the economy, but and you can be surprised, but my instinct, looking at the figures, my instinct is that it's at the upper end of the probabilities.
Our recovery does seem to be linked to a large degree to what happens in China.
Yeah, it does.
Now, you took great strides in improving trade links with China. You opened up free trade agreement talks with China. Are you somewhat surprised at the anti-China trade sentiment that seems to be coming through? I mean, even Malcolm Turnbull has said that he doesn't want Chinalco buying a bigger stake in Rio Tinto.
Well, I don't want to take a particular position on that without having all of the info in front of me, and I don't. And I'll leave it to Malcolm to articulate the policy. My broad view, though, is that Australia should welcome foreign investment from any source. And we have developed our country since World War II off the back of British, American, Japanese, and now I believe Chinese investment. We'll always need foreign investment in Australia, and therefore, and this is without commenting on Chinalco, but as a general concept, we have to be very careful not to reject investment unless we have good reason.
Were you disappointed at all in that anti-China sentiment that came through in the attacks on Kevin Rudd, the roving ambassador line that Malcolm Turnbull used?
I didn't think there was anything xenophobic about that, but Mr Rudd has been very, very confusing on China. He started his prime ministership by allowing his foreign minister to stand beside the Chinese foreign minister and say we wouldn't have a quadrilateral security dialogue with the Indians. And I know for a fact that the Japanese felt gravely insulted by being ignored right at the beginning. Now, so he looked as though he was running a very pro-Chinese line at the beginning, and more recently it looks as though our defence white paper is predicated on a fear of China. Now, I'm confused, and if I'm confused, then I think a lot of other people will be confused as to where it stands. I mean, China is important to us, very valuable market. I work very hard to develop it, and we should welcome China into the world, but we should understand that China is still an authoritarian country, doesn't believe in democracy, and will throw its weight around. But we've dealt with that before, and we can deal with it again.
I know you've done a bit of travel since you've left office. Have you been to China at all since then?
I haven't been to China, no. I'm expecting to go to China later this year.
You have been to the US a lot. Are you keeping up a friendship with George Bush?
Yes, we've seen each other a few times. My wife and I had dinner with George and Laura in Dallas only a few weeks ago. And he's very well, he's very healthy.
Do you talk about Iraq, Afghanistan?
Yes, well, of course we do. Of course we do.
About the current situation there?
Yeah, well, the current situation in Iraq is a lot better, although it's still not secure in the sense that we understand it, but it is a lot better as a result of the surge, which Bush had the courage to undertake, and it was overseen by General Petraeus, who's an outstanding thinker in relation to counterinsurgency, and if he's given the military support he seeks, he will do a better job in Afghanistan, which is now a bigger challenge than Iraq. It's quite interesting.
Do you think that war will be won, Afghanistan?
I think Afghanistan is very difficult, and I think Pakistan is very unstable, and I worry about Pakistan a great deal. And the instability in that country should be a paramount concern. Pakistan is a nuclear state, and it's very fragile, and it's obviously, that fragility is obviously feeding into what is happening in Afghanistan.